Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Solitaire. You can call me Sol or whatever, I don't mind. And today I'll be breaking down the Guracord Winners Showmatch 2021. So why is this a Winners Showmatch and how did it all came to be? So basically, the previous two tournaments organized by Guracord or organized by Flair, I should say maybe, have been the Pirates and Sharks Open Invitational and the Atlantean Chess Tournament, both of which I have or am covering on my channel through live streams before. But the thing is, right, the winner of the Pirates and Sharks Open Invitational, Meridian, or his Lee Chess username DootchMann, did not participate or couldn't really finish the Atlantean Chess Tournament because of academic priorities. So that's why the winner of the Atlantean Chess Tournament, they have changed their username a few times already, but as of now it's Junior Fried Rice on Chess and Fried Rice on Discord, and they sort of agreed to have a show match, like a no stakes show match, just the crowd. And I guess maybe to determine who's better, but not really, right? So the format is best of four, 10+0, rapid match. So it's the same as the two tournaments. And let me think, is there any other context that I need to give? No, I don't. I think that's all. The matches were held like quite some time ago. I think before last Saturday. I think before last Saturday or something, I wasn't there to catch it live, so I'm only taking a look at the games afterwards. Yeah. So with that out of the way, all the context out of the way, let's actually get right into the tournament. I mean, not tournament. Let's get right into the games. So game one, DootchMann has white and Junior Ferrari has black, and from the thumbnail you can see that it started off right away with a very explosive beginning. So the first move is one knight a3. So the sodium attack. It is called the sodium attack because in the algebraic chess notation, Na3, Na is short for natrium or otherwise known as sodium in English. Hence the sodium attack. So a little bit of a chemistry lesson here. So I think it's safe to say that most of us have never seen this on the board before, but you can imagine what are the ideas behind it. So the ideas behind it would be, um, to compare it with knight c3. So knight c3, you gain control over the center, like these two squares, and you also have an avenue to shift quickly to the king side if needed. So like this, something like this. So that is why knight c3 is played, and why knight c3 is the most active square. So in comparison, what does knight a3 do that knight c3 cannot do? So instead, knight a3 controls these squares and potentially influences the flanks a bit more, which is natural because you're developing the knight to a flank. So when you develop your knight to the flank, maybe perhaps you're having ideas of maybe attacking, piling up on this c7 square, which can be a little bit weak, or you might be trying to influence the center via knight c4 and attack the center like this, or maybe you want to play more of a close setup, maybe something like b3, bishop b2, c4, and then knight c2. That is also a possibility, but those are the as you can see, those moves all require the knight to move again. So it's like a bit of a slow opening because no matter which plan you are trying to go for, you are committing to a useless move first. Like this move doesn't do a lot on its own. It does have useful squares to go to, but that will take a lot of time, and that is why the sodium attack is not very popular and it's not very principled because you're sort of committing to move the same piece more than once. So, black responds very principally when your opponent develops to the flank, you develop in the center with e5, good move. So knight c4, trying to take the advantage of e5 and say that, you know what, I'm going to gain a tempo by attacking your pawn, and say that, you know what, my tempo loss isn't that bad. My tempo loss isn't that bad. So knight c6, good move. When attacked by a piece, develop and defend with a piece. So you keep up with development and you save on time. So e4 is played. Um, to open up and try and develop themselves. Knight f6 attacking the pawn, and d3 defending the pawn. So this is another drawback of the sodium attack, which is by committing your knight early on to the flank, you now don't have a knight to defend your pawn on e5, e4 over here. So bishop c5 continue developing. You can see black is developing the pieces very harmoniously, so which is why black has a slight edge, although being the second to move. Knight f3 developing, trying to add more attackers onto the pawn over here, and uh, black tries to take advantage of the piece development and play a very aggressive knight g4. So now both the bishop and the knight are attacking this vulnerable f2 square. So here, white pretty much only has two choices. They have to block the bishop somehow with either knight e3 or bishop e3. So white here chooses to play knight e3, and this here is a critical position. So I would like you to take a few moments, or you can pause the video if you like, to actually think about what is the best way black can punish white's opening choice, um, from a theoretical or principle perspective. So I give you a couple of seconds. All right. So let's actually analyze what has happened so far. So far, right, black has been playing very principally, developing pieces, staking a claim in the center, getting ready to castle. So very principled. White, on the other hand, has been playing very slowly, spending the same move on the same piece three times, um, very rigidly defending a pawn with a pawn and attack with a piece, and haven't blocked their own development, and it's going to take some time before white can castle. So there are two main ways that black can try and take advantage of this. One, by either opening the center with something like d5. So you are trying to claim that if the center opens up, my pieces are going to jump into the attack, and if you try to counterattack me, I can just castle. Whereas you can't do the same because you will need to keep fending off my threats instead of spending time to castle. So a sample variation is something like e takes d5. So trying to gain some time by capturing on e5 and attacking the knight. Where here, black can play something like knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. You want to try and you have lesser space. White has lesser space, so white is trying to trade off pieces and develop more pieces and fend off the attack. So queen takes d5 over here, so your queen is now on the d5 square, and there is no more knight to c3 to kick the knight away. So whenever you can centralize a queen without getting attacked, is probably a strong move. So bishop e2, and then you have to try and you have to try and castle as soon as possible. Bishop takes, f takes, e4, trying to open things up even more, and then get ready to flex your light square bishop, and d takes e4. So something like this would be slightly better for black because of the um, more dynamic pieces, the stronger pieces, and black has a better structure as well. So another more simple and principled way to fight against this, if you are not willing to open things up with d5, is to play knight takes e3. Now the reason is you have only spent two moves with your knight. They have already spent three moves. So effectively, by taking away a piece that they have spent three moves to move, whereas you only have spent two moves, you are gaining time, sort of gaining time, and you are further advancing your development advantage. So by taking knight takes e3, and as mentioned earlier, white has lesser space. White is a bit more cramped because of this committed d3 pawn, whereas black can play d5 soon, which is why black wants to try and trade off pieces and fend off the attack. So white would play bishop takes e3, bishop takes e3, f takes e3, and over here again you have two choices. With this poorer structure from white, black can try their best to exploit the center with two ways. You can play d5, transposing into the to the variation I showed you earlier with e takes d5, queen takes d5, and now there's no knight c3 to kick away the queen, or just castling to prepare d5. And if white tries to prevent d5 by pushing d4 and applying pressure on the center like this, black can still go ahead and play d5. And now white has to be very careful, because if white tries to be greedy to play something like d takes e5 to grab another pawn, but black can play d takes e4, and this queen trade is not really favorable for white, because after knight f to d2, attacking the pawn over here, black can just pick up the pawn. After white takes, then there's bishop f5, winning this c2 pawn over here, no matter where the knight moves. And you'll notice that the king is still in the center. There's a weak pawn on e3. Black has a lead in development, and black is actually far better over here. So, but instead of that, in the game, d6 was played. So this sort of negates all of the things that black have been doing so far, which is develop and then create a dynamic, strong control over the center, applying pressure on f2. But that is all negated by this d6 move, because with this d6 move, black also does what white does and commits to a very rigid symmetrical structure, and this means that it's going to be harder to play d5 and break things open to take advantage of white's slow development. This sort of justifies white's play. So here white decides to try and trade off pieces, because their pieces are relatively undeveloped. So I guess white wants to get rid of an active piece and try and open up some squares for the bishops. So bishop knight takes g4 was played, bishop takes g4, and you can see that black has managed to maintain their lead in development, but it's hard to exploit because the only pieces left are the bishop pair and the knight over here. It's very hard to exploit anything going on the white side, because everything is very solid. The pawn structure is symmetrical and it's still very closed. So white will have enough time to play bishop e2 and castle. But first, white decides to play h3 to kick away the bishop, and in this position, masters haven't played it, because it's not every day you will see masters playing the sodium attack. But since this is a lead chess game, I'll be using a lead chess database, and all of the games in this position have been continued with bishop h5, maintaining the pin and keeping the advantage of piece development. In this position, black played bishop takes f3, and it is as of move 8 that we have a completely new lead chess game. So in this position, white takes back the queen, very uh, intuitive. You don't want to rupture your kingside pawn structure. You still have ideas of castling kingside. So knight d4, trying to take advantage of the queen here on this placement to get the knight on a more nicer square in the center. So queen d1 just retreating all the way back, no qualms about where to place the queen, don't need to worry about being attacked. And now queen h4. So once again applying lots of pressure on this f2 pawn, this time with an x-ray from the dark square bishop. So white has to be a bit careful. Bishop e3, neutralizing all of the threats. This might have been a bit excessive, because although there was pressure on the f2 pawn, there were no real concrete threats. So something like c3 to just kick the knight back and prepare d4 might have been a more accurate response. But bishop to e3 is also fine. Black castles, so getting a king safety before attacking. Black has ideas of maybe f5, opening up the center and bringing the rooks into the game via a rook cliff or something like that. So maybe something like king h8, f5, rook f6, rook f8, and so some sort of attack like that on the f file would be an idea in the future. So now white plays c3 after securing any threats on the f2 square, and here black decides to go with a tactical shot, and it is one of those moves that either work or they don't. So the idea revolves around this pin on the f pawn that the queen has on the king. Let's see what black played. Black decides to go with knight c2 check, sacrificing a knight right away, essentially forcing white to capture. There's nothing better to do. So the queen captures, queen takes c2, and here is here is black's idea. After bishop takes e3, white actually cannot recapture the bishop because of the pin, and there seems to be no easy way to actually trap the bishop. But unfortunately for black, this simply does not work because of the move g3. In between move, you don't have to really capture the bishop right away if you can obstruct the queen's vision of the king. Therefore, g3, kicking away the queen, queen g5 was played. At least I can infiltrate if you take back my bishop. H4 even, kicking the queen back even further. Queen h6, only reasonable move, trying to maintain vision of the bishop. F takes e3, go ahead, uh, go ahead, take my pawn and infiltrate if you want. So queen takes e3 check. The boy now has to figure out how to get out of all the checks, but not to be worried, it isn't too difficult because all of the pieces around the white king is still very close by, and black doesn't really have any extra pieces to help in the attack. So queen to e2, giving up another pawn. Queen takes g3 check, king d2, and now there are no more checks, because the g5 square and there's queen to f4, but after king c2 there are no more checks from black. So f5 was played, trying to open up the f-file and maybe get some attack going. Bishop h3, so trying to dissuade. F takes e4 with bishop e6 check, but f takes e4 anyway, and bishop e6 check, king h8, and now rook a f1. So now white is contesting the control over the f file and saying that, you know what, you don't have time to do anything, and I won't allow you to rook live with tempo with rook f6, rook f8, attacking the bishop, because if you play something like rook f6, I'm just going to capture. And with this structure, you are never you're never attacking me. I can even just take a pawn, and if you try and check me, I can just you can't check me there, and you check me on f2, then I can just retreat back, and everything is fine. So instead, e takes d3 was played, so trying to grab a pawn with tempo over here. Here, white can even go ahead and trade pieces since it comes with check, but that would make white lose a bit of control over the f file. So white decides to capture the d pawn first instead, and maybe afterwards only capture on f8. So black here plays rook takes f1, so just saying that I'm not going to let you capture, but this is a bit of a mistake because of the fact that for the same reason as to why white didn't capture black's rook earlier. So why didn't white do this capture is because after trading rooks, right, the black rook is the one maintaining control over the f file. So that is why white doesn't want to capture the rook. So in this version where black captures the rook on f1, now um, if rook recaptures back, you can see that now white is the one who maintains control over the f file. But instead of taking back the rook, because white doesn't want to lose this h pawn, white decides to just capture the queen and give up another rook. So queen for two rooks was what white decided to play, because white is a piece up, I guess, but in exchange for two pawns, I think, no, three pawns actually. Yeah, so it's in this position. uh, Black is slightly up in material, but because of the nature of the position, because of the weakness of the king and the disjointedness of the rooks, white is actually much better here. White is actually much better here. And after queen g2 attacking the rook, rook takes h4, taking the pawn. Uh, Now queen takes b7, attacking the other rook. Rook f8, trying to coordinate the rooks as soon as possible. So the white queen just gobbles up all the pawns. e4, just gobbling up all the pawns. Rook doubling up. Bishop g4. So this is a tactical swing, basically trying to guard against any rook to f2 check ideas, and also you cannot take the rook because I will then checkmate on the back rank. So the bishop cannot be captured. So instead, e3 check was played, trying to lure the king out. And after king takes e3, there is no rook f3 check because the bishop covers it. So instead, h6 was played, trying to create some air for the king. Um, Queen takes f4, rook takes f4, trading the queen for cashing the sort of cashing out, trading the queen for the two rooks. And here, white is now clearly better because the three pawns that what black was ahead before were captured by the queen, earlier. So now white is just cleanly up a bishop and is completely winning. Well, since these aren't grandmaster games, after all, the games still continue for several moves. For example, king h7, a4, king g6, trying to get the king active, b4, just push it. Where pass pawns must be pushed. Where you have a pawn majority, you want to just push the pawns. King f6, a5, king e7, b5, king d6, b6, so creating a pass pawn. A takes b6, and a6 was played. However, a6 is a bit of a technical um, misplay. It's understandable because in this position, actually, black only has 30 seconds left and white has 3 minutes, and that's why it's understandably so that white doesn't want to spend too much time. But the idea of a6 is to create a pass pawn that is further away from the black king. But just by looking at the squares, you can tell that the black king will always be able to get to the pawn in time. So this maneuver isn't really worth it when you can just a takes b6, when you can just take the pawn instead, get rid of the pawn from black, and potentially have two connected pass pawns with something like c4, c5 in the future. So in this position, black will have to try and get close to the pawn with something like king to c6, and the white king can take advantage of the tempo spent by the black king to win the pawn, to centralize their own king, white's own king with king to e5. If king takes b6, then king to d6, and now white has achieved position, and there is nothing to stop this c pawn from queening. Black can't really do the same in time because the bishop actually is blockading both the pawns. So that's why an extra piece up is good. So this would have been a simpler and cleaner win, but a6 is still winning thanks to the extra bishop. But it shows that perhaps black could have held on a bit longer based on the technique that white was displaying in this game. So after king to c7, bishop f3. So the idea is to try and defend this passed pawn. King to b8, going after the pawn via king to a7. King e5, centralizing the king. King a7, going after the pawn, and bishop b7. So this idea isn't as accurate because now this complex will never move. They basically will never move, and the king cannot really pick up both pawns. Um, I mean, you can because the bishop is covering h1, but um, you are allowing unnecessary complications. So after b5, now you have this pawn to worry about as well. Currently, it's not an issue because the pawn is protecting it, but you have created an extra unnecessary thing for yourself to worry about. King f5, going after these two pawns. G5, so advancing and preventing white from capturing, making white play a few more extra moves if white wants to try and capture. So king G4, blockading both pawns, preventing any further advancement. King B6, so I guess this is just black has nothing better to do. Bishop to C8, so now the bishop is taking hold of this diagonal. King A7, bishop B7, so repeating moves a bit over here. I think white is just trying to get black to panic. King b6, repeating. White has to be careful not to draw by repetition. King g3, this is a bit inaccurate as well. Here, the easiest idea would be just to go and capture the pawns because, and then head over to the king side, the queen side, sorry, because the bishop is always guarding the queening squares. So there's no need to worry about something after here. Um, Maybe something like maybe go back again, and if you capture, you don't really have to worry about you have to worry about g4 because you can just calmly walk over to the queen side. You can just walk over here, here and capture, give up the pawn, but you're back in time to win this pawn because it is on a light square. So the king will try to take control over the b4 square. You can get closer, maybe something like this. Actually, maybe this is more accurate, and we have to try and trade off pieces before the bishop can get into play. So here, white can just push, and then if you try to go for queening square, you can just play bishop to e4, and then you have to run back to defend this. So just gain some opposition, maybe something like this. You can't even go up because of the bishop. So maybe push, check, forced to move away somewhere. Then you can just push a pawn, queen, capture that, defend here, just guard the pawn, and you are mating soon. So this is the cleaner way to finish the game. But black very quickly gave up composure after repeating a few times. King a7, bishop c8, repeating again. King b6, king g4, king a7, king h5, and here maybe black should have just tried repeating, but after playing g4 and king takes g4, black ran out of time, and white wins. So this is the first game of the match. It ends with a victory for Meridian or Mary, and that's all for this video, I think. Let me know if you enjoyed it or if you have any feedback or comments or anything like that. I'll be covering the other two games that were played as well, so maybe that's a little bit of a spoiler. Um, yeah, so anything to say at this point? Oh yeah, link to the Leacher study where there are all the arrows and all the variations that I mentioned will be in the description below. So go ahead and click that and favorite it if you want to refer to it or anything like that. That's all. Thank you for watching.